In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, I bear witness there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is his messenger. I can further attest to the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan being a spiritual double of the Master W. Fard Muhammad and the Lamb, the messenger of God that we have in our midst today. I greet you, family, with the greeting words of peace and paradise. We say it in the Arabic language. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to my channel once again. My name is Lenore X. And before we get started, as always, I want you to, if you could be so kind as to go ahead and subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share if you don't mind. All right, now we're going to get into our subject matter today, which is cause and effect, part 2. But really, we're going to be talking about the laws of God, universal laws. That is really our subject matter today. But cause and effect is part 2 is really a follow-up to the previous video that I've done, okay? Now, let's start at the beginning with the four fundamental forces of nature out here in the universe, okay? Let's start there. Most of us are familiar with gravity. We are introduced to that as children, right? We done fell off a bike, we done fell off a couch, we done fell somehow and learned about gravity, right? This is a force that is out here in the universe. Strong force. Now, strong force, a good example of that would be the revolution that happens inside the womb. When the infant is born, there is a momentum and a gaining of particles, as the cellular structure turns. It starts off as a cell, and then it gradually goes into more and more cellular structure, the binding of these particles inside the womb. Okay, that's a better way to say it. And then the next thing you know, you have the embryo, and then the next thing you know, you have the fetus. Okay, so that is a force that happens inside the womb. Okay, what we know is strong force. Weak force. This is the opposite of strong force. This is the deterioration of particles. What is the word that comes to mind? I think it's interaction, some type of fusion that happens. But an example of that is when the seasons change. When fall comes and the leaves begin to fall from the trees. This is what is known as weak force, and then there's the leaves, they also turn colors, as we know, and then also their whole composition changes. They're no longer green and rich looking. They become red, orange, yellowish, brownish colors, and then they become crunchy. It's the decay of particles. Okay, so this is what we know is weak force, and then we have electromagnetic force, which we know is a dual force. It has two parts, one part electric, one part magnetic, and a good example of that would be lightning, or plugging in any type of plug into the wall. Okay, that's electricity and magnetism, both at work. Now, what's important to understand about these forces is that these are laws out here in the universe, but they are laws in creation, laws of God, okay? And the reason that we're touching on this subject today is because we are in a spiritual war, as you all know these things. And because we're in a spiritual war, we have to be aware of the law. We have to be aware when God is working, and we have to be aware when the enemy is working, okay? Now, because of these forces, the enemy has learned to use this to manipulate these forces and to cause further deception. Okay? That's why it's absolutely important that we know the law, and that we understand the law, and that we know when God is working, and we know when the enemy is working, because clearly the scripture tells us and reminds us that these things can be a matter of life and death. The deception could cost you your life out here. So it's important that we touch on this, and that we understand the hour that we're in. Okay? Let's start with the law, the actual law of cause and effect. The law of cause and effect states that nothing happens by chance or outside of consequence, equal or opposite. Everything, including thought, has a reaction or consequence, equal or opposite. Let me read that again. Nothing happens by chance or outside of the laws of the universe. I'm sorry, I read it wrong the first time. Let's just start again. I want to be absolutely clear. Nothing happens by chance or outside of the universal laws. It is the all, meaning everything. Every action, including thought, has a reaction, consequence, equal or opposite. Okay, now that is the law of cause and effect. We know that Allah has a cause. right? And we know that the enemy also has a cause. Hmm? And let's look at, we'll start with the scripture, the book of Exodus, where Moses is commissioned by the Father to approach Pharaoh. Mm? And not only does he has to go to Pharaoh, but Father gave him power to work these laws that I'm talking about. So him and Aaron went to Pharaoh, and there was a showdown of the power, right? So um, Moses, of course, threw down his rod, his staff. He threw it down, and Aaron threw his down, and of course they turned into serpents. But Pharaoh, he said, "Well, I can make things happen too now." Of course, he summons his magicians, and they threw their rods down, and they also turned into serpents. And then, of course, Aaron's rod kind of swallowed up Pharaoh's serpents. So that show of power uh, that happened, we know that the Father was, of course, more powerful. But what else is important to note? Not only the Father was more powerful, I want you to look at the duality that takes place, okay? The double, the copycat, so to speak, okay? Because in that particular scenario, um, Pharaoh copied the Father, okay? You have to understand that sometimes, what's a good example? Okay, sugar and salt looks the same, is that right? But when you get down to the nitty gritty of it, if you taste salt and the sugar, those are two different flavor profiles, on the tongue. Now, what I'm trying to say is, even though Pharaoh threw down his rods and they turned to serpents, remember, Father's serpents ate his up. So we have to be able to distinguish and to discern and understand, as I said in the beginning, when Father is working and when the enemy is working, because it can look so similar, okay, but it won't be the same. All right, let's continue. Now, Moses again was given a command by the Father to go and work these forces of nature, which are the laws of God, and pretty much contaminate the water sources and the river there, uh, where Pharaoh was and his people. Okay. they were ordered, him and Aaron was ordered to do these things. All right. So they, of course, obeyed Allah, and they went and they did it. But of course, Pharaoh, uh, he wanted to answer Allah with his magicians, okay? And of course, his magicians showed up and tried to show out there and said, well, we can do this too, okay? But the difference between Pharaoh doing it and Allah doing it is Allah's had lasting effects. See, Pharaoh's his little show of magic, blood, water, or whatever, that didn't last. Okay, Allah's did. Okay, things started happening after that, right? You know, nobody could drink the water. The fish died. I'm sure they started stinking. I mean, it got bad. So, as I said before, reiterate, they may look the same when these laws are being manipulated by the enemy, okay? But understand they are not. One is absolute power, and one is a show of power, okay? It's a difference between absolute power and just an appearance of power, okay? We have to be privy to these things, okay? Because the enemy is absolutely out here working. Let's continue. Now, the plagues begin to come down on Pharaoh because he absolutely refused what Moses and Aaron commanded of him from the Father. And even the Father said, well, look, this is going to harden his heart. This is going to make Pharaoh angry that every time I send my people at him with a message and with power and authority, and it outdoes his authority, it only pretty much made Pharaoh rebel even more because he never did listen to what the Father had to say. And because his heart was hardened, the plagues just really came down on him, okay? They broke out in bulls and frogs was everywhere. They had lice. When the Father puts something on you, see, what's important to note here is Pharaoh couldn't do nothing with that. All he could do was get mad that he broke out in bulls, that frogs was everywhere, that, the people that had lice and all of these things was happening. Remember, there's a difference between a show of power and absolute power, okay? Yeah, I want to point out the law there, okay? The law was in play when the rivers turned to blood, and the law was at play when the rods turned to serpents, okay? This is not something spooky and magical like Disney, okay? Get that out of your head. We're talking real science here. And if you know how to apply these laws, you can absolutely make things happen. Okay? Don't think this is some type of fantasy world where this only happens in the movies. Okay? We're talking real law and real science here. Okay? And more than that, we need to be aware of these things, because like the Father is sharing with us, our very lives are going to be in jeopardy because the enemy has already been playing with these laws, and he's not done. He's gonna keep doing it. And for those of us that are not aware of what's taking place, well, that puts us in a really bad spot. Okay? So it's really important that we know the law. Okay? Let's continue. Now, the scripture, Revelation chapter 13, verse 14, is talking about the beast. It's talking about how the beast would deceive many by the means of signs and wonders and miracles. Well, I want to use that word because the scripture actually says that he had been given the authority. Listen at them words. That beast had been given authority to make fire come down from the heavens in the sight of men. Now, the book of Mark says that, the false Christ and the false teachers will seduce. Did you hear that word? Seduce the people, so much so that even if it were possible, they could deceive the very elect. I'm talking about those that's kind of up there in wisdom, huh? So, like I said in the beginning, we have to look for these things, this duality thing. And I want you to keep that word in your mind, because we're going to go over that as it applies to these laws, but keep that in mind. You'll see why at the end of this talk here, this lecture. Okay? But anyhow, back to the deception. Okay, the dragon would be given power and authority to make fire come down from the heavens. Said he would also persuade the people to create an image of the first beast, that was wounded and did survive that deadly wound. Okay? And then it goes on to say that those who would not worship the image of the beast would be killed. Hmm? Now, I want you to think about today, you know, and what's happening in 2020. This is what, December of 2020? Hmm? I want you mentally to identify the beast. It's important that you know this, because this way you'll know um, who's trying to double as God today. Okay? It's very important that you pay attention to these things. That's our promise is going down. It's already done went down. We in the war. Okay? And if you think the enemy is going to stop his plans just because we're not paying attention, it's not going to happen. We have to give our minds to the Father so that we'll be able to withstand the evil of this day, as the scripture tells us. Okay? So, our very lives are at stake when these laws become manipulated. Okay?